Welcome back to Wiggle YouTube channel. I'm your host Owen. Happy draft week, everybody. Today I'm going to be doing one of the multiple mock drafts I'm going to be doing throughout this week. There are going to be different styles of mock draft. The one that we're going to be doing today is going to be one where it's what I would personally do sitting down as the GM of each of these teams based on my own personal rankings, the scouting I've done of these players specifically, and looking into each team's financial situations and their depth charts, and just really breaking down where I would go with these picks based on all those different factors. So I'm going to go in there. You're going to see the picks. I'll talk about some of them. A lot of it, there's some chalk at the beginning of the draft class here, so I'll try not to dwell on some of the picks that are very popular right now and that a lot of people who are interested in the draft but aren't really there all year round have already heard, and get to some more interesting picks and some of the prospects I think aren't being talked about enough, or some of the ones that I think are going to be lower than a lot of people expect them to be. So a lot of these picks, I'm going to spend more time on the ones that aren't really or kind of more unique for my mock draft as opposed to other ones. So other than that, let's just get right into it. So like I said, we have a lot of chalk in this mock draft, especially early on, the first couple picks. Obviously, number one, Chicago from Carolina is going to be Caleb Williams, quarterback at USC. They really made a decision when it came to taking Caleb Williams when they traded away Justin Fields. I think the bigger question now is whether or not Caleb Williams deserves to be QB1, which is kind of ridiculous to me. I've had him QB1 this entire time. I previously had him in my top-ranked player overall on my big board. Recently, he dropped below Marvin Harrison Jr., but I do still think Caleb Williams is the best quarterback here, and it's not even really relatively close between him and Drake May. A really creative guy who's going to come in, have a lot of weapons, and will get some more help later in this mock draft, but somebody who's going to come in, and because the Bears are so set up to succeed right away with who they have on their roster, I do think will succeed immediately. I could see him making a Pro Bowl his rookie year, but I'm going to kind of temper the expectations a little bit here. I think he'll have slightly worse of a season than we just saw from C.J. Stroud this past year with the Houston Texans, because I feel like the situation he's coming into with the Bears is very similar when it comes to the situation C.J. Stroud came into with the Houston Texans, but I feel like C.J. Stroud was more of a pro-style quarterback as opposed to Caleb Williams, who's going to have to learn a little bit more. So expect him to be just under where C.J. Stroud was, but has the talent and probably better weapons than Stroud did, at least initially, before Tank Dell emerged and they got hurt, to really make an impact out there and lead Chicago to a lot more wins than they had last year, which I think they could be a 10-win team, to be honest with you, especially with Caleb being their starting quarterback. At number 2, we have Washington with Drake May, quarterback out of North Carolina. My number 2 ranked quarterback, also a top 10 grade. I've been seeing a lot of people pull back on Drake May as like a top-end quarterback prospect in this draft class. And, I mean, the tape's the tape. It hasn't changed from when you first look at it to now. I think it's just people looking to have contrarian takes, others that are more skeptical of certain things as opposed to believing he can grow into that, because I have seen people talk about him reading defenses, which I thought he was relatively good at for what they asked him to do at North Carolina. So I don't think that's a major question mark when it comes to his game. If you're going to question him on that but not question Jaden Daniels, I don't really know where you're coming from in that stance. So I think Drake May, talent-wise, is the second best quarterback on my big board, and I do think he can come in and be Washington starter immediately, especially with the way their quarterback room is looking right now. They might need someone to come in who is able to play right away, and more so than some of these other guys here. So kind of works out that they got a guy who is naturally number 2 quarterback on the board, a top 10 level player, who also is probably one of the best ones to come in and start day one for them. So I'm very high on Drake May as opposed to what the common consensus is all of a sudden now around him. And at number 3, I've made some videos talking about this previously, about how the New England Patriots got kind of screwed when Caleb Williams decided to come out, and other things like that, where I believed that New England was going to be targeting a quarterback and wanted to go Jaden Daniels, and I wasn't really a big fan of Jaden Daniels, and with Caleb Williams coming out in the draft class, Jaden would be the third available quarterback there, which would force New England to take him if they wanted to take a quarterback. I've always been on this train. I will continue staying on this train. I think New England should stay at 3, grab Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver Ohio State. This offense is just putrid, and if you're going to bring a rookie quarterback into this, you need to make it more sustainable for success, especially early on for a young guy. So, do I think Jay Daniels is good enough to go here at number 3, or J.J. McCarthy? No, I really don't think they would be good enough to go here at 3. Do I think there are some teams that if they were at 3 and they had the roster around those guys that it could be worth it? Sure. That's not New England. I think New England needs to stick and pick the best player in this draft class when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr., and just build up that offense through free agency and the draft this year and then the early draft next year. You could grab a guy in the second round either this year or next year, or even the top of the draft next year, because you're not going to be a good team this year. And he'd give you the same thing that a rookie Jaden Daniels or a rookie J.J. McCarthy would give you this year without the potential of ruining them after one season with a terrible offense around them. So I really am on the Marvin Harrison Jr. to New England bandwagon, and this, as a Bills fan, terrifies me, which should be all the backing you should want as a New England fan for having this pick be made, is that like your divisional rivals will be terrified if you make this pick. And at number 4, this is another trade-up spot for a quarterback. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of taking any of these other quarterbacks in the top 5. No other quarterback I have is a first-round grade. So with Arizona, it was debating whether or not they wanted to go Malik Nabers here or trade back. I decided to just stick and pick with Malik Nabers, wide receiver LSU. He's another top 10 graded player, and my only other wide receiver graded in the top 10, and he's my second graded wide receiver overall. And I feel like Arizona took a swing with Marquise Brown when they traded for him with the Ravens, and Kyler only really got one true season with him when you combine the first half of the season he was there and the second half, and then Kyler got kind of hurt in between. I do think they kind of had some chemistry, and it was looking like it was going to be successful, especially when Arizona had both those guys healthy and on the field, but it just never ended up clicking, and it was kind of a wasted investment. Malik Nabers gives you what you want in a Marquise Brown, except a lot more complete of a receiver and actually brings some size with him. Marquise Brown was 5'8", 5'9". Malik Nabers is north of 6 foot. I do think this is the kind of guy that the offense in Arizona is lacking. I do like Michael Wilson, but he's kind of more big body, slower guy that can be your possession dude, down the field, big body, contested catch target. You need a speed option, a dynamic receiver like Nabers to come in and be that kind of piece on the outside for Kyler if you want to make Kyler succeed and make that contract not look like an abomination. I'm one of the people who have faith in Kyler, and to continue to have him succeed and make it worth, surround him with more weapons, surround him with more protection, and Malik Nabers is the best way to go when looking at that. And at number 5, we have our first trade. I feel like this makes sense for both teams here, with Minnesota trading up with the Chargers. Minnesota is obviously targeting a quarterback, and you'll see they get their guy here that I think they should go with. And the Chargers, having such a lack of talent overall on the entire roster, having to tear stuff down because of financial reasons and having a whole new coaching staff come in with a whole new philosophy, it just doesn't make sense to stick and pick at 5 when you have so many other holes. You can get 2 first-round picks this year, as well as a first next year and an additional pick to surround that or bolster that entire roster. And if you need to move around and stuff, you get that additional pick. In 2025, you have 2 firsts, so you get to combine 4 first-round talents onto this roster over the next 2 years. I really think this is the best move for them when it comes to trading back, finding enough capital to make it worth it, to give up that 5 overall spot. And for Minnesota, you're so close to succeeding as a team that you just need a quarterback who can evolve into a more dynamic player than what Kirk Cousins was giving you. And a young 20-year-old J.J. McCarthy coming into this very quarterback-friendly system with an offensive coach, with Justin Jefferson. You got J.J. to J.J. I think that if you're going to have somewhere he's going to succeed, it's going to be in Minnesota, who can allow him to take deep shots over the middle of the field, those deep crosses, Justin Jefferson, and they'll be worth the trade package here, especially because McCarthy is so young, so raw and developable, and has all these tools that I think bring him into the system, having so many pieces like Jordan Addison as well as number 2 receiver. Your offensive line isn't terrible. You made investments there for the past few seasons, and an offensive-minded head coach who has worked under the Sean McVay system. I think all of that put together is the spot that J.J. McCarthy can succeed the most in. If New England is the spot where he's going to succeed the least in, or least in, I think Minnesota is the spot where if you draft him here, this is the best case scenario for him as a developmental prospect. And I think if he's going to succeed, Minnesota is the number 1 place where he can go to. So he's my QB3. He's knocking on the door of round 1 grade, but I have him as round 2. Overall, I do think he has higher upside than a guy like Jaden Daniels, which is why I went here with Minnesota. I feel like his play style and his youth and ability to be molded into the quarterback you want is what makes Minnesota eager to jump up and grab him here. And at number 6, we have New York Giants sticking to picking Rome Odunze, a wide receiver out of Washington, knocking in a top 10 grade for me. Odunze is one of my favorite players in his draft class, not only because he played for my favorite college team in Washington, but he's just such a receiver that gets open without having to rely on more dynamic, flashy things or being schemed open. He just is a guy who can provide a safety blanket for his wide receiver while also getting open downfield. And even though he's not the most dynamic athletically, he comes in and he's still able to win downfield, and he puts in the work. He's a hard-working guy and provides something for the Giants that they don't really have. I was looking at Brock Bowers here, but they're still banking on Darren Waller to come through and be there. It's kind of stud starting tight end. And with Darius Slayton now in contract negotiations and unhappy with the way his contract is now, on top of that, even if you had Darius Slayton there, you could still add on, become a number 1 or need a number 1 receiver to complement him and Jalen Hyatt. Rome Dunze comes in. I think he'd be your Keenan Allen, your Stephon Diggs level receiver for that Brian Daboll offense. And it just overall is the best pick they could go here. And I don't think trading down is really the smartest thing. Maybe if a team really loved Jaden Daniels, they could do that. But in my eyes, I'm not the biggest fan there. And if I'm all these other teams, I'm willing to let somebody else go up and trade up and give up some stuff for Jaden Daniels at 6, as opposed to waiting to see if he falls a little bit before I can trade up and grab him lower down on the board. So number 6, New York Giants, just sticking and picking the best player available for them. It works out that it's the best player available and is the number 1 for their needs. I don't think he's overall best player available, but it's close enough that because you have such a new wide receiver, the Giants stick and pick Odunze here. And number 7, the Tennessee Titans stick and take Joe Alt. This is kind of chalk. Everyone's been talking about this. He's a top 10 graded player in my eyes, number 1 offensive tackle. I played around with the aspect of I feel like the Tennessee Titans roster is a lot better than people are giving them credit for. However, and so I thought maybe like, this could be a trade down spot. Tennessee could trade down and grab one of these more developmental offensive tackles or lesser thans and try to pick up a lot more draft capital, disperse that around so that way they can do some financial maneuvering if it comes to it later down the road. However, I think Joe Alt is so good, and with Tennessee, why even take that risk? Just get that stud left tackle and let Will Levis be the guy that you think he can be, and see if he can achieve those heights that you project for him and what I project for him. I really loved Will Levis last season, so I do think he can come in and be a good quarterback for you. You just need to keep him off his back. He got hurt and was under pressure so much that you didn't really get a good look at him when it came to constantly being harassed last year. So if I'm going to be the Tennessee Titans, I want to value Will Levis, bring in a stud left tackle and Joe Alt. Don't overcomplicate this. I tried to overcomplicate it in my head and ended up just settling with the most easy option, which is Joe Alt, offensive tackle from Notre Dame. Number 8, we have another common pick here. It's kind of chalk. Dallas Turner, edge to Alabama. He's just one of the best edge players in this draft class, is really versatile. I had him as edge 1 coming into the season, even when Jared Havertz was getting all that hype, and I kind of got a little pushback from that in the draft circles that I worked in and was writing for and stuff. But Dallas Turner showed up and really proved me right there. He has a good mix of speed and power rushing. I feel like he can develop even more as an edge rusher and really bring something to Atlanta's defense they're missing right now. I do think they need that number 1 dominant edge player to come in and pressure quarterbacks, especially in this division where they have quarterbacks who are kind of on the up and coming or are not terrible. Like you have Derek Carr, you have Baker Mayfield, you have Bryce Young. You want to be able to get after those guys and make them make mistakes because they're all prone to doing so if they're under pressure. So Dallas Turner comes in, really makes that defense better, and allows you to play a more balanced game instead of just relying on solely your offense and offensive firepower with Kirk Cousins and all your other weapons you've invested high-end draft capital in over the past few years. At number 9, we have Chicago taking Jackson Powers Johnson, the interior offensive lineman for Oregon. He is my number 1 graded interior offensive line player. I know that's going to be kind of shocking to some people. I know he's been falling down draft boards after having like a really good Senior Bowl and kind of a good off-season hype around the All-Star games, but I've looked at his tape and I fell in love with Jackson Powers Johnson. And I do think that people who are kind of pushing back on him now are just trying to find things to poke holes in his game. I know as a center, he wasn't the best when it came to like snapping the ball, but it was his first season at center. He previously played guard for the Oregon Ducks, and he played deep line his freshman year, even like in a bowl game. So he's an athletic marvel. He plays with an edge. He has that power. He has good technique. You just need to season him more. And I think Chicago, you might be wondering why I taking out interior offensive lineman. We just paid Nate Davis 3 years, $30 million last offseason, so he's got another 2 years on that deal. And we just traded for Ryan Bates, the backup center from the Bills, who the Bills were really looking to step in and be their starting center, or the fans were anyway, after cutting Mitch Morse. But I guess the Bills didn't really want that. I don't think either of those guys are preventing him from drafting Jackson Powers Johnson. You draft him, let those 3 guys battle out, and the best 2 start, and then really give Caleb Williams that good offensive front to protect him. Because a lot of things that were happening in USC, which was bringing Caleb Williams down in people's eyes, was that he had to be Superman. He had to be ultra creative and escape the pocket, sometimes unnecessarily so, but he felt like he was not protected enough. And if you get Jackson Powers Johnson in and let just your best 5 offensive linemen start out there, I feel like Caleb Williams is going to be set up for a lot more success, not just with those great wide receivers, but also some good protection in front of them too. So that's why I have JPJ so high as opposed to other guys' mock drafts. I just think that highly of him, and I think it's a good fit for Chicago. In running on our top 10 here, we have the New York Jets taking Jerzon Newton, the defensive tackle out of Illinois. Top 10 graded player for me. I know a lot of people kind of fell off of him. He's not even in some people's first round mock drafts because he had this foot injury, played through the second half of this season. I think when he was healthy, and even when he was hurt, he was playing fantastic football. He's just a dog out there of absolute ball player. And I know a lot of people really like Byron Murphy, the second out of Texas, and I have him also graded as a first-round kind of player. But with Jerzon Newton, I think he's at another level with dynasticism, whereas Byron Murphy can come in and be that player that is like a constant, solid starter. But Jerzon Newton, not only does he complement Quinnen Williams with his skill set here, and you can have him playing in like a 3-4 set or coming in and be that gap shooter, and Quinnen Williams draws all the attention, but you have someone who could come in and has that upside that I think a guy like Byron Murphy really isn't providing for you. So I did think offensive line here. I did think Brock Bowers, but overall I felt like, again, as a Bills fan, this is the most terrifying pick the Jets could make, and really solidifying that front four or front three, however the Jets want to run it, is really something that I think is important and will lead to them having more success, especially if Aaron Rodgers gets another injury or if their offense just isn't clicking right away with Aaron Rodgers coming back from the Achilles injury. I do think that leaning on that defense, regardless of who's your quarterback, is still going to be the means to winning games next season. So Jerzon Newton here, one of my favorite players in this entire draft class at 10. At number 11, we have the Los Angeles Chargers having traded back with the Minnesota Vikings, taking Brock Bowers, tight end out of Georgia. One of the top 3 players in this draft class overall. And if I'm the Chargers, I need more offensive weapons for Justin Herbert. But at the same time, I want to establish his identity of running the ball, running a lot more 12 personnel. So getting a guy in who could be both that secondary move tight end for me, as well as like a high-level passing game threat in Brock Bowers, I feel like that's just a perfect mesh of what they need right now on their offense when it comes to playmakers, as well as matching their new kind of style of offense they want to run under Jim Harbaugh. So not really a big question here. This is kind of a simple pick for me, and I don't know why it's not being mocked more, especially if they are mocking a Chargers trade down. And at number 12 here, we finally have the trade up for Jaden Daniels, quarterback out of LSU. A lot of people are probably wondering where he was sliding until, and this is where it stops. I have the Rams giving up 1983 and a 2025 third for the 12th overall pick. And I've been using the kind of trade charts to balance these out, so that's what I use to construct these trades, so it's not just me pulling numbers out of my butt. When it comes to the pick itself, I feel like Denver has its eye on a different quarterback, and I don't really like the Jaden Daniels in that kind of Sean Payton system, so I don't think this would be a place for the Broncos to draft him. And when it comes to the Rams, why they would do this, I do think that Matt Stafford is on his last legs as a quarterback there. And when you're with the Rams, you're not really having a lot of opportunities to draft first-round quarterbacks, especially with Stafford at quarterback for you. I don't really love a lot of picks for the Rams in this draft class. Maybe Byron Murphy later on where they're picking, but you have no real confidence that he's going to fall to you. And there's a lot of other guys I like for the D-tackle class in the later draft round. So you could wait to pick there, replace Aaron Donald, or at least get some rotational starters in there to help replace that production. But when it comes to quarterbacks, you need to take a swing on that, especially for a guy like Jaden Daniels, who could benefit greatly from playing under Sean McVay, who's a really hyper-intelligent, quarterback-friendly coach, have a year behind Matt Stafford, who is always injury-prone, so he might as well have some insurance there, but also could really benefit from having that backup year and learning under a guy like McVay without the pressure of starting, and learning from a guy like Matt Stafford. So you have that. You have the wide receiver weapons that he had in LSU, where he had these 2 dynamic receivers on the outside for him. You got Cooper Kupp, who's kind of this hybrid outside slot dude, and Puka Nacua, let alone some of the other guys they'll probably be able to bring in through this draft itself. I really think the best landing spot for Jaden Daniels to succeed in the NFL is with the Rams and with a guy like Sean McVay as his coach. I'm not the highest on Daniels. As you can see, he's my quarterback 4 and still has a round 2 grade. But somebody with that dynamic of skill set who can be super accurate when he's inconsistent, but when he is on, he's really on. Has the ability to run, and with those weapons there, he doesn't have to take a big drop off of what kind of weapons he was throwing to in college to now in the pros. So I feel like this makes the most sense for the Rams. Denver, having their eye on somebody else, will trade back, collect more picks, really build up that roster and that vision that Sean Payton has, and it makes sense for both teams for me personally. And Jaden Daniels' slide stops here. At number 13, pretty simple pick here. Las Vegas takes J.C. Latham, my number 2 overall interior offensive lineman, and I feel like as a guard, which I graded him as, I know tackle is kind of more of a mixed bag. He'd be more of a second-round pick for me at tackle. But as a guard, I feel like J.C. Latham has all-pro potential. He's absolutely a beast, a monster in tight. He has these long arms that have vice-like grip hands. He's a great power blocker. Despite not having the best get off, it's because he's a much larger guy and being able to work with a lot slower defenders in front of him as opposed to like the edge where you have these 250-pound guys who can get off the ball real quick. I do think J.C. Latham will succeed more as a guard. And grading out as a guard, he's one of the highest first-round grades I have in offensive lineman here, outside of like Joe Alt and JPJ. So I think he's my third overall offensive lineman graded here. And the Raiders just going to want to have to run that ball. I know they got rid of Josh Jacobs this year, but that's still going to be the mindset and mentality for this team, especially with the confusingness that's going on with quarterback there. Kind of similar to New England, build around that quarterback, establish an identity with running the ball, and giving protection to whoever is throwing passes for you, which you might see if I ever do drop a second-round pick or second-round draft. I think I have them probably the best spot for Michael Penix Jr. here. So grab something like that in the second round, really build up the rest of the offense around him. And J.C. Latham can't really do much better than that when it comes to a guard in this draft class. So that's why I have him here at 13 to the Raiders. At 14, we have New Orleans Saints taking Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle at Penn State. I've seen this pick mocked a lot. I really do like Olu. He's one of the, again, higher graded offensive linemen I have. He didn't really take that big step I thought he could take from last year to this year. I think I had him as OT1 last year, and he came back this year. I thought, okay, he's a little bit raw technically, so now he's going to have another year to develop, and he's going to be even better, and that didn't really happen. So with the New Orleans Saints trying to cut costs everywhere, Ryan Ramczyk is injured and might be a cost casualty going forward. I think Olu Fashanu could be the guy to step in and be their tackle of the future, especially when he's on that rookie deal. Could really help dig this team out of the perpetual tire spinning they've been in for the past few seasons. At number 15, the Indianapolis Colts take Xavier Legette, wide receiver out of South Carolina. He is my wide receiver 5, but he still has a genuine first-round grade. He's the last receiver I have that has a first-round grade. And a lot of people might have this be the Adonai Mitchell spot or the Brian Thomas Jr. spot. And that makes sense because Indy really needs that kind of dynamic receiver who brings some athleticism, some down-the-field threat there to pair with Michael Pittman Jr., who's a slower kind of big-bodied receiver, and you have your slot and Josh Downs, and really provide some more deep threats for Anthony Richardson when he comes back to play. I just think Xavier Legette is a better receiver overall than what those other two guys are in Mitchell and Thomas Jr., and also provides the same thing that like their biggest calling card is them being deep downfield threats. They ran really fast at the combine. Xavier Legette didn't run nearly as fast as those guys. I think he ran like a 4.39, which isn't slow at all, but he's just an overall better receiver on top of being that deep threat kind of receiver guy. So overall, I think Xavier Legette is the better receiver and still fits that mold of receiver that Indy is looking for right now. So that's why I have Legette here at 15 over some of those other guys that people are probably pining for when it comes to Indy drafting receiver. I just really am not as high on those other guys as I am Legette. And at 16, Seattle takes Troy Fautanu, staying in Washington, going from Washington to Seattle. I think in this offense he would play guard, but he's my third-rate offensive tackle. A lot of people are talking about him playing offensive tackle because he isn't the best athlete and doesn't have the most length. I did think he overcame those things on tape at the college level, so it might be wishy-washy whether or not he can do that at the pro level. I feel like I'd want to try him at tackle at least in the pros. But with Seattle having Charles Cross and the other guy from Washington State that I can't really think of right now, who's the right tackle, I do think they have their tackle duo set. So kicking Fautanu inside the guard is perfect for them, especially after losing both their starting guards to free agency this year. And if either of your tackles go down, I think Fautanu could come in and step in and be a very serviceable replacement and maybe even better than that guy you have at right tackle. I can't remember his name for the life of me. I really liked him in that draft class, and it's making me mad. But overall, Abraham Lucas, I think that's who it is. Troy Fautanu, just overall super talented offensive lineman, doesn't have to travel far from college to the pros, and is just another versatile offensive line player that you can plug in for one of your biggest weaknesses when it comes to a team in Seattle there. At 17, the Jacksonville Jaguars, pretty obvious pick. I've seen this one a lot. Cornerback in Jacksonville is really just the biggest move for them and the most popular one, I believe, in all the mock drafts I read. And Terrion Arnold is my number one corner. I was debating Quinyon Mitchell here, but I feel like the way Arnold and Mitchell win is kind of similar when it comes to being athletic guys who can win with their eyes on the quarterback and reading the entire play and then coming down and collapsing on the catch point. So since I have Arnold graded higher, that's why I went here. But if they went Mitchell, I really wouldn't hate that. So Jacksonville really needs to have that kind of dominant number one corner. They've been taking shots at guys like C.J. Henderson and other players like that who are more gambles, and nothing's really paid off for them. So having a guy to come in who could be a definitive number one corner, it has room to develop because I feel like Arnold really hasn't even played his best ball yet, and he looked better than Kool McKinstry, and it seemed to be even the more athletic and even more high upside than a guy like that. So I think Jacksonville, in drafting Arnold, has a guy who has high floor, has a high ceiling, but I feel like still has to grow a little bit before he's like the number one dominant coverage corner but that's still better than what they have in the roster right now. So that's why I have Arnold here to Jacksonville. At 18, we have Cincinnati taking Talise Fuaga, the tackle from Oregon State. Is another popular pick, so I'm not going to dwell on it too long. Absolute road grade right tackle, absolutely paves roads for guys like running backs, which the Bengals are running Zach Moss out right now at running back, which in the second round I'd be looking at like a guy like Ray Davis to come in and contribute. But overall, he's also just a talented pass blocker when it comes to using his length and having an anchor. So the Bengals have been trying to get that right tackle spot down. They lost Jonah Williams, so you're really looking to find solutions to the offensive line for your oft-injured quarterback in Joe Burrow, and this just makes sense for value to need and kind of best player available matching need at the same time. So it's kind of a perfect pick for the Bengals and where they're picking at 18, especially in this deep offensive line class. At number 19 is when we have Denver trading down with the Rams. They take Bo Nix, the quarterback of Oregon. I'm not a huge Bo Nix guy. I don't really see the upside, people say. They constantly come out and talk about when they talk about Bo Nix is he got put into a system at Oregon that allowed him to play more in a system and more conservatively, but he still can turn on that Auburn side of him where he's scrambling around and making plays down the field, and it's kind of more reined in now. But first off, I didn't really like him doing that at Auburn. Like, he wasn't good at Auburn, and that's what he was doing all the time. So I guess if he's doing it less frequently, he may be able to maximize the amount of time as a good play and minimize the amount of time as a bad play. But I just felt like even when he let the Auburn Bo Nix side of him out, it was often not to the best success of the offense. So he was either being handheld too much, or when he tried to let the stallion ride, it was kind of a mixed bag of results. But I do think he is an accurate quarterback who, if you ask him to run an offense that isn't just throwing the ball behind the field, when he was given designed throws or simple reads over the middle of the field or further down the field, he succeeded with that and was really accurate with it, has the ability to use his legs. And I think that's kind of like the mold you're looking at for a Sean Payton offense. I feel like Jay Daniels wasn't really that guy who can come in and execute an offense flawlessly when it comes to just doing the reads the coach gives him and the coordinator calls. He wants to, jazz a little bit more and use his legs to extend plays, whereas Bo Nix likes to do that, but I feel like he can also work really well as a system quarterback. And if you're going to be drafting a system quarterback with slight athletic upside, that's what Denver needs, and that's what Bo Nix is for them. Even though I have him as QB6, I do think this would be a good investment for them, and I don't think they'd be able to get him later on if they went and tried to get him in the second round. So I have Bo Nix here at 19 at Denver. And at 20, we have another surprise pick that I kind of want to dive into a little more than the other picks I've previously gone over. At number 20, Pittsburgh's taking Jalen Polk, the wide receiver out of Washington. He's my 4th ranked wide receiver, and I know guys like Steve Smith and there's been some few voices talking about him being a first round kind of wide receiver. I love Polk. I know the downside is he isn't the most athletic. He wins with routes. He has nice hands, but he isn't going to stretch the field. He's going to be more of that middle of the field kind of workhorse for your offense. But for Pittsburgh, who needs someone to complement George Pickens, who's more of that big body, downfield athletic threat, Jalen Polk working over the middle of the field and winning with routes to allow Russell Wilson to throw over the middle of the field or work in rhythm with a guy is perfect for what this offense needs. So it's a perfect match of a receiver I feel like has the talent to be a first round pick because he has such a high floor, as well as complementing what they already have as wide receivers on that offense at Pittsburgh. They also have, I think, Calvin Austin still, who's really a firecracker type of like gadget receiver. So bringing a guy in who can just win with straight routes, win over the middle of the field, win outside by beating corners with his routes, but not really looking to be like that big play after with the ball in his hands or being able to cook guys downfield with his speed. I feel like they already have that on the roster, which matches up well with what Polk has his weaknesses. So Polk, Pitt, I think is a perfect match, and that's why I have him here at 20, because I do have him graded as a guy who can go in the first round at 20th overall. So that's why I have him here where other people probably won't. They have him more in the late second round. At 21, Miami takes Byron Murphy II, the defensive tackle out of Texas. This is simply put, I kind of talked about him a little bit when I talked about the Jets drafting Jerzon Newton. Miami lost Christian Wilkins to a gigantic deal from the Las Vegas Raiders, and replacing him with Byron Murphy, I feel like you're not really losing a big kind of drop-off there in talent from Wilkins to Murphy. Wilkins is one of the best D tackles in the league, and I think Murphy can come in and be one of the top 10 best D tackles in the league rookie year. He's that good. He's great at using his leverage. He's fantastic against the run. He has upside when it comes to putting together better pass rush plans and attacks when rushing the passer. I feel like his twitchiness and high-end athleticism is a little bit lacking compared to Newton, but overall it isn't bad. And being able to replace a guy like Wilkins with somebody who has such a high floor like Murphy does and still has some ceiling to give, I feel like Miami would knock this pick out of the park. They could just sprinting to the podium to get this, just to replace that level of player. And with how deep the offensive line class is in this draft, you can hold off and wait to the second round, maybe even trade up a little bit in the second round to grab a guy like a Graham Barton, like a Christian Mahogany, that you can come up and grab and replace those guards that you lost out. I can't remember, Robert Hunt was the one who went to the Carolina Panthers. That's kind of a popular pick for Miami going offensive line here, but I think the value you get with Byron Murphy and the need after losing Christian Wilkins is too great for them to not make this pick here at 21. And number 22, Philadelphia, cornerback. Just pick your lot here. Quinyon Mitchell is my number 2 corner. I kind of talked about him a little bit with Terran Arnold. Great when it comes to working off the ball, looking at his eyes, making the triangle between quarterback and receiver, watching the ball be thrown, collapsing on the catch point. Also is long and showed off some man coverage skills at the Senior Bowl. Was really good at the Senior Bowl in those one-on-one drills. So I think he's a very versatile piece. If you have some bounce-back seasons from your other corners that are on the roster who maybe just had a down season, you can move him around and mix and match. But I feel like he would come in and be your automatic number 1 guy and allow for less pressure to be put on some of these older corners who struggled last season. So overall, cornerback to Philly isn't really a daring take, and Quinyon Mitchell especially, I feel like this is a very popular pick, so I don't really have to explain it all that much. And number 23, the Chargers are making their second pick after that trade with Minnesota, and I'm having to take Ladd McConkey, the wide receiver out of Georgia. I feel like for a Jim Harbaugh team that really wants to run the ball, but it still needs some more playmakers on the outside, you have a decent offensive line right now. You could probably grab an additional guard or like rotational swing tackle later in this draft and kind of boost it up a little bit. I know you still have need at center, but none of the centers right now I feel like would mesh well with the scheme they want to run and with the value they're going to be looking to get here at 23. Whereas a guy like Ladd McConkey comes in, he can be a blocker, he could be your slot receiver while you have Quinton Johnson and whoever else, Brock Bowers maybe on the outside, or he could be an outside receiver. He's a fantastic route runner, can work that short intermediate area while you have Quinton Johnson pushing it downfield. Overall, I feel like he's just a Harbaugh type of receiver and could bring something that this offense really is lacking right now, especially in that receiving core. They don't have this true route running, winning type of wide receiver, which Ladd McConkey is. So I think it just adds a dynamic to that receiver room they don't have right now, and they just need to continue adding talent all around Justin Herbert after having that kind of big purge with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams being gone after the season. So there you go, first round wide receiver for the Chargers, which I know they are really looking forward to getting or trying to get one. And I think being able to trade back and get both a top-tier tight end as well as a wide receiver is really going to satisfy Chargers fans when it comes to really rebuilding that offense around Justin Herbert while still fitting the mold that Jim Harbaugh is going to want to run in his offense. And number 24, we have another trade. Buffalo trades up with Dallas to jump the Green Bay Packers and draft Latu, the edge out of UCLA. Buffalo gives up 28, 128, and 163, as well as a 2025 sixth. In return, jumps up 4 spots, gets 24, and gets a 2025 7th. The reason I gave up 128, 128, and 163 here is because the Bills have picks in both the 4th and 5th round outside of those ones, so you're not really sacrificing a whole round there when it comes to giving up a pick and not being able to pick in that entire round. And Dallas gets this, and they're targeting somebody, but they know that the next teams are probably not going to take the guy they want, so they're maximizing their value, getting some more draft capital, and still being able to land their guy they're going to want later in this first round. Buffalo takes Latu. They really just need that dynamic number 1 edge rusher. Von Miller has been an unfortunate case of injury and age catching up to him and making that contract look awful. Greg Rousseau, I think, could be an elite number 2 edge rusher, but you really need that number 1 guy who can come in and win and attack the passer to really kind of beat these other quarterbacks you've kind of been stuck behind in the AFC. So Latu isn't a wide receiver. I'm sorry, Bills fans, but I feel like being my edge 1 and being almost like half a point off of a top 10 grade makes it worth it. I don't think the head and neck injuries are going to be as bad as people are advertising. It's kind of similar to his former teammate in UCLA and Jalen Phillips, who had to retire then come back from head and neck injuries, and he's been fantastic for the Dolphins. And all the injuries he sustained from the Dolphins during his career has not been related to what he had in college. So I don't think I'm going to be too worried about that. Latu comes in, has the biggest bag of pass rush moves I've seen out of a prospect. And I really do think he can win in multiple different ways. He can come in and be your quasi 1A, 1B pass rusher with Greg Rousseau, allow AJ Epinesa to be that really strong number 3 edge rusher, and allow you to just have a free lottery ticket with Von Miller. He doesn't need to come in and be your number 1 pass rusher anymore, but whatever he gives you is a bonus after drafting Latu here. So that's why I have the Bills being aggressive and moving up to draft Latu. They have extra capital. They have a big need at trying to get a difference maker at edge, and having a guy who is as talented as Latu fall this far doesn't happen every year, so you have to take that swing if you have the opportunity for it. So that's why I have them moving up here and with Dallas to jump some other teams that are going to be looking for edge rushers, especially one as talented as Latu. At number 25, Green Bay. This is the pick that everyone's giving them, Cooper DeJean, cornerback / safety. I think we'd play him at safety in this defense right now with where their kind of needs are. But I'm actually higher on him as a cornerback than some other people are. I do think he could be a very good cornerback on the outside or in the slot. Green Bay fans, I'm sure you've heard this pick talked about over and over and over again. But just bringing somebody in who can be the kind of dynamic piece to work off of what you already have in that secondary and just be good wherever you put him. Like he's the Band-Aid for whatever position you think is the weakest right now in the secondary. Slap Cooper DeJean there, and I think you're very happy with that. So very simple pick here, 25 to the Packers. At 26, Tampa Bay is one of the teams the Bills wanted to jump for edge because they're going to go Jared Verse here, Florida State. I feel like Tampa Bay's roster is good but not great in a lot of places, so it's kind of weird where you want to target with their first-round pick because you don't want to invest something there and take away from some of these other players you think might be developing or need to get some playtime based on their contracts, stuff like that. I feel like Jared Verse comes in, replaces Shaq Barrett's production, as well as works good with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who I really liked coming out of his draft class. And overall, is just probably the one biggest place of need for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now. I debated giving them a wide receiver here to develop once Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are gone, but with how deep the wide receiver class is in this draft, I feel like they could wait till round 2, round 3 to grab somebody like that to develop behind those guys. And having Jared Verse come in and be an impact player on that defense, try to allow their defense to win them games if Baker Mayfield does struggle a little bit next season after losing his offensive coordinator to Carolina. I do think Jared Verse is probably the best overall pick for them here with where they're at and what their needs are and looking towards the future on how to win games, especially when your wide receivers are getting older and maybe leaving soon. So I think Jared Verse could come in and be an absolute stud for them for the next couple of seasons. At 27, the Arizona Cardinals picked Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. I'm a huge Zach Frazier guy as a move-blocking center who is going to have to be out there with a lot of moving pockets with Kyler Murray and stuff. I feel like his movement skills is fantastic. They're going to want to attack with a lot of wide zone schemes. Zach Frazier fits that to a T, and the only real spot on this offensive line I feel like could use an upgrade was at center, and it kind of worked out that there's a true first-round graded center here for them to draft and pair with guys they already had given money to on the outside with their tackles, and they've invested some stuff in the guard as well. I feel like overall, this just completes the offensive line. You got your big-time wide receiver weapon in the top half of the first round, and now you have another guy who's going to be able to complete that entire ensemble, and now you can really focus on defense, which is Jonathan Gannon's specialty. So you got the offense figured out. You're going to win games because of that, and Jonathan Gannon can work his magic with the defense after investing some more stuff in like round 2, round 3, moving forward. At 28, Dallas moved down and still landed a top 10 overall player on this board, or top 10 graded player for me, and that's Peyton Wilson, linebacker at NC State. Absolute stud. The best film of any linebacker I've seen probably ever, and that includes like JOK and Micah Parsons. Like, I love Peyton Wilson. He is the quintessential modern-day linebacker. The only reason why he's here at 28 is because his medicals are terrible. He had 2 major shoulder injuries, 2 major knee injuries in high school and college. So it's really a gamble for Dallas here to take him, but you got that extra draft capital. You're able to invest in other positions with those picks you got and move around in the middle rounds. Because of that, you got some more trading pieces there. And with Leighton Vander Esch retiring and a real big need at the middle of that defense, if you want to keep Micah Parsons as this roaming kind of blitzing, pass-rushy linebacker, Peyton Wilson comes in. He can be your absolute stud middle linebacker. There are no middle linebackers on the Dallas Cowboys roster that will prevent me from drafting a guy as talented as Peyton Wilson. So that's why I feel like Dallas can afford to trade down if they're going to target Peyton Wilson, because I feel like a lot of teams are going to have him off their boards entirely because of injury, and you can trade down while still targeting this guy who is one of the most talented players in this draft class overall. At 29, Detroit takes Ennis Rakestraw Jr., the corner out of Missouri. When I was watching Rakestraw, I immediately thought, this is a Dan Campbell cornerback. Like, this is the guy that'll fit perfectly for Detroit. The attitude, the play style, the edge and competitive toughness he plays with. I just feel like you look at him, he screams Lions. And Detroit, even though having made investments in the secondary with Brian Branch last year, you had a linebacker invested in the first round pick there. You got Aiden Hutchinson as your, elite player on the edge. You really need to invest into a cornerback. The Jeff Okudah thing, while you traded him away a couple seasons ago, you haven't really found a replacement for what you thought Jeff Okudah could be for you. You have a bunch of kind of guys that I don't really have as needle movers, and while I do have Rakestraw as like a borderline round 2, round 3 kind of guy, I feel like coming in and being put into a proper system that's going to benefit him the most is what's going to maximize his potential and get him to be here at 29 to Detroit. That's exactly the spot he needs to go to if he wants to be the most successful. So Detroit gets their cornerback. It's a bit of a reach, but I feel like because he fits their system so well, he may be able to play out and, reap the rewards of that, despite it being a slight reach as of right now. And at 30 is the other cornerback a lot of people thought maybe should go to Detroit, is Nate Wiggins, the corner on the Clemson. This round 2 grade and him falling to 30 is not because of the injury at the combine. I don't really put a lot of stock into that. It's mostly just because I feel like he's a little bit raw. When it comes to his reaction timing, to closing on passing windows, I don't really like his length. You could tell, like, when it comes to trying to get a hand into to block the ball or to break up the pass in the wide receiver's hands and trying to get into those throwing lanes, the lack of length shows up. He has fantastic athleticism, and if you can get him somewhere like a Baltimore where they've been able to develop these corners, someone with that level of athleticism who can maybe benefit from having more of a getting coached up and having a higher mental football IQ there, that'll make him probably the best player he can be. So him going to Baltimore fits way better than him going anywhere else, including Detroit. So I feel like Nate Wiggins, to succeed and to maximize that potential going to Baltimore, is probably the best case for him. And just Baltimore always ends up landing these guys who are supposed to go way higher in the draft and everyone's talking up, but they fall for one reason or another, and Baltimore always snatches them up, these high upsides, and people are always wondering, how did Baltimore get this guy? Well, I'm not that high on Wiggins. A lot of people are, and this just feels like a Baltimore-style pick. At 31, San Francisco takes Chop Robinson, the edge of the Penn State. He's my 4th-ranked edge. It is barely outside of the first-round grades for me. I feel like after taking a swing on Chase Young last year and just trying to add as much talent to his edge rush group as possible to really lean on that defense to win games, it didn't really work out for them, and they had to let him go, or Chase Young go. But bringing Chop Robinson in to be that wide 9 kind of pass rusher, I feel like he works best when in space and able to use that speed, which San Francisco frequently wants them to do with their edge rushers. So having him come in, be a number 2 pass rusher next to a Bosa brother, is probably the best case scenario for Robinson and for the 49ers, who have kept trying to find different investments at the edge position in different ways, whether it's through signing Cleveland Farrell or trading for Chase Young. They now have their permanent edge 2 for the future, and they have a dynamic bookend pair of edge rushers moving forward, as well as being the best place for Chop to maximize his potential when it comes to his play style and having the ability to not have to be that number 1 main focus of a defense. Now, this pick could be wide receiver, because with the whole Brandon Ayuk news, that could be looking there, but I'm not really going to jump to conclusions there, as well as I feel like Debo and George Kittle and that can really carry this offense, and you can look to get a wide receiver in the second round to replace Ayuk, just because how good this wide receiver class is. And in 32, we have Kansas City taking Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. I do have other wide receivers graded above Mitchell, but with the whole Rashee Rice incident, I feel like they need to take a swing at a guy who may have number 1 receiver potential. I'm not the biggest Adonai Mitchell fan. I feel like he doesn't work the best moving laterally across the middle of the field. He's a non-factor with the run after the catch ability, and I do think he needs to be brought along more. He has first number 1 receiver potential, but if he doesn't become a number 1 receiver, I don't really see him being like an accent piece to an offense. Right now, what he offers you is a big target who can move down the field fast, has some dominant catches, but also has some questionable hand moments. I feel like it's more good hands than bad. Overall, if you have a guy like Travis Kelce working in the middle of the field with those intermediate routes, having that quick route running and chemistry with Mahomes, having a guy like Mitchell who can fill that Rashee Rice role, and if Rashee Rice is back, he could be more your rack number 2 receiver type who can really work the opposite side of the formation and have Mitchell really draw attention from both the corner and safety. This could be the best place for Mitchell to succeed earlier on in his career and potentially develop into that future number 1, even though I don't think it's super likely that he will, just because I don't feel like his athleticism really lends to that, but he could be on the DK Metcalf path of being this kind of bigger body receiver who can win downfield and have other guys around him to complement what he can't do, and that'll be the path for Mitchell to succeed, which Kansas City is set up for him to be able to do that. And just to give Carolina Panthers something nice, I left in their 33rd overall pick in this mock draft, and it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr. This also allows me to put him into this mock draft where people are probably screaming at their phones or computers or in the comments saying, "Where is Brian Thomas Jr.? You don't even have him on this first round. You don't know anything." I understand people really love him, and I do love him as a down-the-field threat, being 6'4" and can run in the low 4.3s. It's great. I just don't love anything else about him as a receiver. Like his rack ability, that's pretty good. But like as a route runner, creating separation, his hands, all of that, I think are huge question marks. So I have him as receiver 14, but for a team like Carolina, who has their route runner Adam Thielen, who has these other complementary kind of wide receivers, but no one who a defense is afraid of when it comes to getting behind the safeties and attacking downfield, Brian Thomas Jr. is the player they're going to want when it comes to that. So despite me not really loving him as an all-around receiver, to fit in that mold for an offense, the one team that could benefit the most from that is Carolina. So despite me having a third-round grade on him being the first pick out of the first round, despite that being a reach when it comes to my grades, I can see that because of the fit, because of what he provides you as a receiver, and overall, I think he just is a good fit for what Carolina needs here. So there you go. I got Brian Thomas Jr. in my mock draft. That's the end of my mock draft here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me what you thought about it in the comments, where you think the best pick was, the worst pick was, who I'm sleeping on, who I'm too high on, all that stuff. I love the conversation, and I'll be down in those comments, throwing around debates, just responding to everybody who comments something. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.